and welcome to the third installment of Young Political Activists. Here today, we have three wonderful panelists who will now introduce themselves. First.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Jackson. I'm from Gunn High School and I'm a junior.
Hi, my name is Pablo and I'm here representing Young Americans for Freedom.
Hi, my name is Rohin Ghosh and I'm representing the Palo Alto High School Democrats Club.
And my name is Jenna Kaplan of Gunn High School. Our first topic will be a new law introduced in California mandating solar panels. On Wednesday, May 9th, 2018, California became the first state to require all homes constructed after the year 2020 to have solar panels installed either by purchase or rental, according to the New York Times. It is predicted that this will add $8,000 to $12,000 to the cost of a new home in a state already plagued by affordable housing issues. The California Energy Commission predicts that homeowners will cost about $40 a month, but will save nearly $80 a month on utility bills, and will ultimately make owning and maintaining a home less expensive. There is controversy over the upfront cost and the additional regulation, however, despite the clear benefits of less reliance on dirty energy powers and a predicted decrease of cost in the long term. To start out our discussion, we will be talking about this one question. What are your thoughts on the new law? Do you think that this demonstrates progress in our state or instead hinders progress? We'll start out with Steffi.
So my first thoughts of this is that I am supportive of the effort to try to encourage the use of renewable energy sources. However, in this case, I don't think that this law is practical, and I don't think it's a good way to try to enforce these types of situations. I think that it's really going to be increasing the cost of housing when California already has a problem with affordable housing, and it's already causing more problems for more people. And so the law in general is more costly than it is going to benefit people in California. And honestly, I think that it's not going to be practical within our certain situation.
Rowan?
So my opinion on this is I'm very supportive of the way it encourages the use of a renewable resource that we have a lot of access to in California. We're a quite dry and sunny state. However, I think one essential provision that we have not added to the bill is a strong tax credit to offset the initial cost of installing the solar panels. And I think that tax credit could be financed by raising the extraction tax on fossil fuels in California, which is currently 9.5%. I would favor that being raised by whatever amount is necessary to finance a full tax credit or tax rebate for people who install the solar panels on their homes.
Pablo?
I think that my main issue with this new legislation is that it's not of the law itself that requires people to have solar panels in their new houses. I think my issue with it is that it shows how big government is getting and how it's really interfering in people's everyday lives, and that government does not have the authority to tell you what energy source to use. It just doesn't. It shouldn't, and it doesn't. And by mandating people what to use, I think they're in a way overstepping their boundaries.
This show, I too will be a participant. I believe that this law is making a lot of progress in California because already our, not only country, but our world is plagued by climate change, which is proved to be caused by human consumption of energy. A significant contributor of this, of course, is fossil fuels, and I think a decreased reliance on this is a great thing. Even though I know that there are problems with too much reliance on a single source, which in this case would be solar panels, I think ultimately it is making progress. In addition, the process of building a house, especially in California, already involves so much regulation. I don't think that it's any overstepping government power to have one more thing, especially one that has such an incredible impact on our community.
Well, I think that's the main reason why this regulation the reason why it's impacting is the reason why the government might be overstepping their boundaries when it comes to increasing housing prices, especially when it comes to the California Energy Commission. We had this law was passed unanimously by the commission with very little debate between many of the delegates in the commission, which definitely worries and concerns me because this is going to be impacting and increasing significantly the prices for many low-income families. And in general, it's going to be costing a lot of families who in general aren't going to be able to afford a house in general in California, much less a house with solar panels. So I think that the government or the state government right now is only causing more problems for the people that need the most help in the state.
So I believe that the issue of affordable housing in California is definitely one of the most important issues we face, but I think the challenges presented by the solar panel mandate can be offset through what I mentioned earlier, the tax rebate for the developers and the owners of the buildings that will entirely offset the cost of building the solar panels, and that can easily be made revenue neutral by raising the extraction tax, considering especially that we're already decreasing our reliance on oil and gas and want to do that further.
So,
You failed to mention that by raising the extraction tax on fossil fuels, that will also raise the price for fossil fuels themselves. So many people who rely on gasoline to get to their workplace will not be able to do so because they will not be able to afford such high prices. So I think you're tending to leave out millions of Californians who use gas every day and need it to get to work and to cook and to do a lot of things. And I think that the liberal elites up in the government are just overseeing past all these people, and they tend to forget that not everyone can afford such high prices.
So, because of the difficulty of passing any sort of tax law, regardless of whether it's in California, the federal level, or any other state, I think an immediate solution to this is it's not necessary to purchase. So although the purchase price is $8,000 to $12,000, you can also rent. And according to the same New York Times article from which I got my other facts of, renting is about $72 a month, which is less than the amount of money that a family would save, which would be around $80 on utility bills, actually allowing them to save money without having the upfront cost of putting down a couple $1,000s, which I do recognize a lot of families, especially with exorbitant house prices already, cannot do.
Yeah, I think that that's a good, I do think that maybe a tax increase might work. However, I do think that it definitely could cause more problems, and I definitely think that the option of purchasing or renting is definitely a good option. However, in general, I think that the law is going to be more costly than necessary. And I think that we cannot overestimate the amount of people or underestimate the amount of people who are still reliant on fossil fuels. And I don't think that the entire state of California, maybe here in Silicon Valley, there's been an increase in electric cars or in reliant on renewable energy. However, not in the entire state of California. And so I think that putting that into perspective is definitely important when considering the entirety of California and how much we are actually going to be dependent on fossil fuels for a significant amount of years following this. And I think that we're not going to be making any type of significant changes within the next coming years, whether or not we have this law passed or not.
Well, I think that bringing up the point that not all of California is the same brings up the idea that I think around the Central Valley, there are millions of families who are struggling to pay for their utility bills from their municipalities. Sometimes they aren't even able to be connected to the grid because they are in rural areas where utility bills are significantly higher than in urban areas. However, in the Central Valley, over the summer, it's fairly common for there to be months at a time of temperatures at least in the 90s during the day. And the Central Valley, many areas of the Central Valley, which is the poorest region of California, get far more sunshine than many of the other regions of the United States. These areas, if more houses have solar panels in these areas, there will be more families who have access to electricity, which opens up a lot of opportunities for people once they have access to electricity in their homes.
If it is so profitable to rent solar panels instead of using traditional fossil fuels to heat up their homes or get electricity, why don't people already do it? The things I don't think these numbers accurately represent what's happening, because if it really was profitable, I think everyone would do that voluntarily, and I don't think a law should be put in place to ensure it if it's so positive for everyone.
So one reason for this is because there's an economic theory, of course, of supply and demand. And already in California, there is a large demand for solar equipment, and that's why prices over the past decade have gone down significantly. However, putting this law in place and making it so that around 100,000 new customers will be in the market for solar equipment every year would drive the prices down even more and make it more affordable rather than less affordable. And over time, this would make solar panels possibly even less expensive than traditional ways of getting electricity to houses.
When demand increases, price increases too. It's not an inverse relationship. When more people want a certain item, the price of such item goes up, because sellers can bid up their prices since they have more customers.
However, there's also an inverse to that. When more people are buying an item, a company or a corporation can afford to decrease their prices because they're selling to more people. That's why monopolies often bring the prices down and then don't raise it up until they're able to due to political capital.
That's a fair argument, but if we consider that 100,000 families, you said, or 100,000 new customers are going to be forced to buy such solar panels, what's the incentive for the companies to lower prices if they know those people are forced to buy their product?
Competition. There are already so many companies in California, and 100,000 new consumers each year is a huge pool, and many new entrepreneur-led companies will be springing up to fulfill this need, which will ultimately bring prices down significantly and may even go lower than the 8,000 to 12,000 predicted today.
I think it might have some long-term benefits, possibly, but that isn't guaranteed. What is guaranteed is that there's going to be significant cost in the short term, and that's going to be definitely affecting low-income families, such as those mentioned previously. And although they might have more access to electricity through solar panels, they're not going to be able to afford the rent of their house, to afford the mortgage of their house, when they're paying so much to try to implement these new solar panel equipments or try to afford them in the first place. And so in general, there's no guarantee of a long-term benefit, but there is a guarantee for a short-term cost. Therefore, there isn't really a purpose for such a law unless it has more restrictions or more legislation on the way that it is going to be implemented through a gradual process of introduction of a solar panel requirement, rather than something so I don't know how to say it, like
Extreme,
exactly. Because in this case, in the next 2 years, all new housing is going to have solar panels, and I think that that's a much more abrupt change than necessary.
To respond to your earlier point, so I know that I mentioned earlier that there is the option of renting, in which families would actually be bringing in a net of $8 a year rather than losing any money. So that could be a big thing for that. And in addition, California is already on an upward trend, and while I agree this does seem like a little bit of a jump, I think that it's not as crazy as it may seem, given that already so many houses that are being built have solar panels, because that's what sells. That's what people want. Now, people are constantly moving towards ecological living and things that are friendly towards the environment, because people are aware that ultimately we are the ones who are changing it and we are the ones who need to fix it.
I think that your comment just kind of, I think it shows that you might be a little out of touch from people, because are you saying that people are buying solar panels more and more and more? But the thing is, if that were the case, why do we need so many governmental laws and tax benefits and tax cuts for such buyers? Because if it's so great for everyone, why do we need the government to step in and force people to buy the product? I just don't think that's what people really want, because if it's what people really wanted, we would not need the government to tell them to buy them. That's the thing.
However, or at least most people know that college is something that benefits everyone and that it's a wonderful path for most people, yet we still need government assistance for that. It's simply that some people can't put forward the immediate capital to make that happen. Sometimes you need the additional governmental regulation push to make this happen. And I believe that this is the same for this. It's something that will ultimately benefit everyone who is exposed to this law. However, you need some governmental aid in getting to that point, because people sometimes can't get themselves there on their own.
I think another interesting thing that we have not looked at in this entire discussion so far is that Clean energy is one of the fastest growing job sectors in the United States. And on average, a person who installs solar panels is paid significantly more than people who work in the oil and gas industry and other fossil fuel industries. And having such a high demand for solar panels will open up thousands of new job opportunities that are in a middle skill but fairly high pay for that skill level for thousands of people. Because installing solar panels is significantly more complicated than maintaining an existing oil well. And that is why people generally who do this are paid more, and but they don't need too much training compared to, they don't, for example, need a full college education. That is why opening up more opportunities for the solar industry will allow a lot of people who don't have a college education to get higher paying jobs.
So let's have one response to this comment, and then we will be moving on to our next issue, which is talking about Trump's decision to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
So to respond to your point, I think that, yes, wait 1 sec. Could you remind me of your point?
Well, my point was that a lot of new jobs will open up due to the solar industry.
It might drive up certain jobs in that sector. However, it's also going to be decreasing the amount of jobs in certain other sectors in electricity. And even if they're not going to have to go through another college education, they're going to have to go through more vocational training in order to get those jobs, while also competing with people who are coming out of a college education through solar panel. So it's going to be driving competition in those certain areas. Therefore, it's going to be lowering employment in those areas, and it's not going to be able to give the amount of jobs that current electricity and other sectors are already given.
Okay. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. I know that there's so much more to say on this issue. It's a huge thing right now. Climate change is and always has been a big issue, but especially now with this law, it's a whole new topic of conversation. So now we're going to go into a slightly different area, and that is U.S. foreign policy. So on Monday, May 14th, 2018, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, fulfilled his campaign promise made during the 2016 presidential campaign to move the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to West Jerusalem, the seat of Israeli governmental affairs since 1949. While West Jerusalem has long been unofficially considered the capital of Israel by the United States, it was not till December of 2017 that the president officially announced that the U.S. was recognizing it as so. The announcement was met with a lot of condemnation from many international organizations and communities, many of which have long histories of condemning Israel. And violent protests at the Israel-Gaza border, led by Hamas operatives, ensued. It is unclear what the long-term effects of the embassy move will be, although anti-Israel violence in the embassies is expected to pick up, especially due to recent events. Now, onto our panelists. Our first question: do you believe that the decision to move the embassy was the proper decision and was done at the proper time?
For me, yes, I do think that this is a long-awaited policy that definitely needed to be implemented. And I think that with the current protests, we can see that, yes, it has caused a lot of uprising. However, in general, it was a good decision for President Trump to make.
I think that this decision should have been made a long time ago, a very long time ago. But finally, it has been made, so I think that's good. But I believe that it could have been implemented a lot earlier.
I believe that this decision was a bad decision when the bill calling for the embassy move passed in the 90s. I think it is and I think it has been a bad decision since. I completely oppose the idea of moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem before the status of Jerusalem is decided in peace talks between the Palestinian Authority and Israel.
So I believe that because it is agreed upon, according to all agreements at the moment, that West Jerusalem is part of Israel and East Jerusalem is part of the territories, I don't think that this was a particularly controversial decision, and I do believe that it was correct for the United States to move its embassy to Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. However, I think that it should have either been done a long time ago or in the future, given that it came around the same time as the U.S. withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal. I think that it's so much turmoil in the Middle East right now and is putting the United States and Israel in a very difficult position, both within international communities and within the media.
Well, I think that the Iran deal is definitely a reason why it should have been made at this time, because you see that there is a growing threat of Iran in the Middle East. Therefore, that's threatening Israel. And for the longest time, the United States has been with Israel, on Israel's side. Therefore, it is more important for us to be taking a stance, taking a solid stance on where we stand with Israel. Therefore, it's going to show our support for our allies within the Middle East, therefore creating more stability for our allies in the Middle East and against Iran.
So my worry with this is that it's putting Israel on a near two-front battle. So on one hand, it's dealing with violent protests on its southern border with Gaza, and on the other hand, it's dealing with now real military conflict with Iran in Syria, which is just creating a whole lot of tension between it and the international communities, such as the United Nations. And I think that if either of them escalate into a full-scale battle, it'll be terrible for Israel to be split on two borders.
I just don't think it's right for the U.S. to not do certain things based on their belief that of what's best for Israel. Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, all Israelis are really happy about this decision. So I don't think that we should. I don't think that this should not have been made just because it would have been better for them, because I think Israelis know what's best for them, and the overwhelming majority of Israelis do agree with Trump's decision.
Well, referring back to an earlier point that the status of West Jerusalem has already been sealed and East Jerusalem is the part that's up for debate, I think the entire city of Jerusalem is still extremely contentiously debated, even though certain agreements passed may have already declared West Jerusalem to be part of Israel. That is not, the Palestinian Authority, while it may accept that, still sees advances into the advances by the international community into West Jerusalem or any part of Jerusalem as a direct confrontation or threat, which I think is a bad thing to do, seeing that the peace process has stagnated at this time. And I think the best thing for the entire region would be for the international community, including the United States, to help get the peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians running again. Also, about timing, the protests at the Gaza border, which started out peaceful on the Palestinian side, were already occurring before the embassy move was ordered. Thus, I think seeing that thousands of people were already protesting at the Gaza border and anything could have escalated that made this one of the worst possible times to move the embassy to Jerusalem.
So
you mean
just one correction on that. All of the protests were started in response to the decision to move the embassy. Even though that they began before the embassy was officially moved on May 14th, the reason why the protests began was because of the decision. And also they did start out with fires burning at the border and people scaling the fence. So even though there may not have been direct violence, such as throwing Molotov cocktails or throwing rocks or throwing burning kites or other things that are happening at the moment, it did not start out as a peaceful march, as seen in the United States at certain times.
Additionally, there were Hamas leaders within the protests recently, and Hamas has been declared as a terrorist organization by the Israelis. Therefore, it's going to be treated like a terrorist organization by the Israelis. And for this reason, they were not considered as riots. They were not considered as protests. They were considered as a terrorist act against the border or at the border of Israel.
The thing is, the whole protest itself was planned by Hamas to damage Israelis' international, to damage the opinion other countries out of Israel itself. They planned Hamas and his companions, they organized protests they knew they're going to be violent. They knew that civilians would be injured and many of them killed. And he still went on because his one goal is to make Israel look bad, because that's what it is. And he knows that some Palestinians will die in the protest. Regardless, he doesn't care. He knows what he's doing. And it's not like it just happened, like it wasn't planned, because the whole thing was planned, as many would agree.
But there were still unarmed protesters who were away from the fence when fire by Israeli soldiers began, who got shot in the protest. They were away from the fence. They were just carrying flags. They were not lighting fires or scaling the fence, who were actually killed by the Israeli military during the protests.
So I'd like to move away from the protests a little bit and go back to the actual move of the United States following the embassy. So the United States is the first country in a while to decide to make this decision. And do any of you believe that other countries, many of whom have their embassies still in Tel Aviv and simply have consulate generals in Jerusalem, should follow suit and move their embassies proper to West Jerusalem?
I think that's very important for other countries to move their embassies to Jerusalem to show that the international community overwhelmingly supports Israel, because many European nations, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, they all support Israel, yet they do not want to move their borders because they're scared of the consequences of the protests that will arise and how other countries will see them as. So I think it's just a matter of courage and a matter of standing up for your own opinions and your own beliefs.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I definitely think that what we're going to be seeing is we're going to have many of the countries who initially voted against declaring Tel Aviv as the appropriate capital of Israel. I think that those countries are going to be the first ones following the United States to move their embassies to Jerusalem. So you're going to have Guatemala, you're going to have Togo, and they're all going to be moving their embassies to Jerusalem. And therefore, I definitely think that you can predict that some other European countries are going to follow suit in that case.
Okay. We will have one final comment, and then unfortunately we will be wrapping up our third show.
So I believe that not only will this decision not pressure other countries to move their embassies, I think it will pressure other countries to take a more hardline pro-Palestinian approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In the past, we've seen actions that we have seen for example, under the Bush administration, there were more, when the U.S. held a more pro-Israeli stance, there were many more countries that decided to formally recognize Palestine as an independent nation.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time on Young Political Activists, Part 4.